Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to Civilized Pills. I'm your host, Jack, and in today's episode, my guest is a professor of music from the University of Liverpool, musicologist who researches how music intersects with other disciplines, from philosophy and psychology to biology and religion. He has written so many books about music, and best known are Metaphor and Musical Thought, A History of Emotion in Western Music, A Thousand Years from Chant to Pop, Music as Philosophy, Adorno's and Beethoven's Late Style, and of course his latest bestseller, The Musical Human, A History of Life on Earth. It's a book for everyone, even people who think that they have a little interest in music. I think everyone should read this book. So please welcome Professor Mike Spitzer. Hello, Mr. Spitzer. How are you? Welcome to the show.
Thank you, and thank you for your very kind introduction. I'm very happy to be speaking to you.
Thank you. I'm very glad that you are my guest in this episode. Before we get to your professional career and the development of music in humans, I want to start from your early childhood with your personal history. When and how music actively entered your life?
Well, the funny thing is, although I'm associated with classical music, as a child, my memories are from pop music. So like Tom Jones and ABBA and the Eurovision Song Contest, and Simon and Garfunkel, songs like Mrs. Robinson. It's funny because I came to classical later. I have when my family began to play classical music and I heard the sound of it coming from downstairs beneath the floor, and I associated that music with home, with love, with warmth, with deep psychological principles. And truth to say, to be perfectly frank, my family had a terrible marriage, and the more difficult it became, the more music was where I retreated to, and music became my home, and I never left that home.
Oh, great answer. When did you become interested in how music intersects with other disciplines, and what was the main inspiration for this kind of amazing and gigantic research which you made over those years?
Well, not for a very long time, because I hoped to get all my answers from conventional musicology. So when I was in Oxford University, it was a very traditional musicological historical course. And this is back in the 1980s. And people didn't try to relate musicology to philosophy or psychology. That came a lot later because of fashions changing. And I'm self-taught. I had to do the research by myself, and that came to me during my PhD. I began by looking at German idealism philosophy and the work of critical theory and Theodor Adorno, who's probably the greatest philosopher of music in the 20th century. And he was, like me, obsessed with the music of late Beethoven's the music he wrote in the last 10 years of his life, the Ninth Symphony, of course, the piano sonatas, the string quartets. As for psychology, that came a lot later when I was writing my book on metaphor. And I was very interested in how we understand the world in terms of our body by projecting schema or schemata from our body, such as walking, the idea that we walk through a landscape, that we stand up, we have gravity, we have balance, we are a container, we have it inside and outside, and we understand music in the same metaphor as we understand all of life. And my next step came to emotion, and I wasn't happy with how abstract schemata were. I think most listeners, if you ask them, the fundamental experience of music is emotion, feeling. And the funny thing is that musicologists don't, as a rule, talk about feeling. I don't understand. And most psychologists and scientists have been working on emotion for many, many years, but not musicologists. So I'm I think, the first person to try to write the history of emotion. So the way we understand anger and fear today isn't the way that anger and fear was felt 1,000 years ago, because emotions evolve. For instance, anger used to be a happy emotion. People were happy to fight because fighting was part of the dignity of being a man, or being. People enjoy violence, and because of civilization, we repress this fact that people like violence, and music is very good at expressing that.
Yes. So you explore music on a grand scale, what music means and how it works, music's power over our brain, how it affects our emotions and behavior in our everyday lives, why music is so essential for humans. I know those are the big questions for you. And my next question, I think, is the biggest one. In order to start discussing the topics which I just mentioned, my question is, what is music? I know it's a very, very complex question. And of course, it's so difficult to describe and define music. But can you explain briefly from your perspective, what are the main and fundamental characteristics of music?
Yeah, okay, I have two answers to you. The first answer is very simple, that music is humanly organized sound. So it has to be organized, so it's not random sound, and it has to be human, so it has to be full of emotion. So a clock isn't music because it's not emotional, for instance. Now, the problem with that answer is that 90% of music isn't human, because music is mostly rhythm, and you have rhythm in the planets and the universe, stars and pulsars, and the moon has rhythm, and the sea has a rhythm. And similarly with vibration, the whole universe vibrates. Similarly with emotions are come from animals. So Charles Darwin taught us that emotion comes from adaptive behavior. So when you're angry, you fight. When you're frightened, you're running away to survive. And another more interesting perspective is to do with plants. That most of activity happens which is unconscious, and or the vegetative part of the body. And if you look at melodies or tunes, they behave like plants. They have flowers, they blossom, they branch out like trees. There's something about the human imagination which is like a plant, and no one knows why. So I think this evolved first. We begin as plants, and we became animals a little bit later. And you see this plant-like behavior in folk music, because folk music is rooted like a tree to the soil. So Georgian music has roots to Georgia, like a plant does. And indeed, the way that folk music behaves, it's not about individuality, which is animal. It's about the collective experience. So most folk song is collective, like plants. So in the history of music, you start off with a much more vegetative or plant-like ethos, and it becomes more individualistic with Mozart and Beethoven and so on. So you have all these layers, these levels. That my main idea is that music, like people, are layered. They have different layers.
Before we largely start to discuss Homo sapiens music, which is way older than most people think, the human species created the first musical instruments about 40,000 years ago, right? But before we get so-called civilized music, I'm very interested in nature and music of animals. We know that many birds can sing, as well as mammals, which have a sense of rhythm. But very interestingly, our oldest ancestors and currently related species, I mean apes, who have a better intelligence than the other various species, cannot make music despite their highly intellectual abilities. They don't have the ability to create music. What do you think? What's the reason for this? Can you talk about this? It's a very interesting fact for me.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Birds sing, and the structure of a bird song is very similar to musical to human music. It has hierarchy or patterns which repeat at rising levels. That's also the case for humpback whales. They're as structured as human music. Insects like cicadas have rhythm, but apes have no rhythm, so you can't teach an ape to beat time regularly. And apes can't learn melodies. It's what biologists call vocal learning. So all animals are born with their instinctive vocalization. What makes a bird musical is that you can learn new melodies. We can do it, birds and whales can do it. Monkeys and apes can't do it. So apes are extremely intelligent and they're very creative in how they use gesture. So apes communicate with their gestures, with their hand gestures, facial gestures, and so on. But they do not communicate through sound. Sound is quite rare in mammals, and Darwin was very clever in pointing out that most mammals are visual or use their sense of smell. They don't use sound. Yeah, or hearing. So in terms of where humans evolved their music from, they got it really well from themselves. What they got from primates was gesture and sociality. So the idea of using gesture to bring people together. And actually, there's a lot of gesture in music, the way we think of the beginning of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, da-da-da-dum, that's a gesture. And how a conductor conducts it is using his hands, that's a gesture. So what we've done psychologically, we're interpreting physical gesture sonically in terms of sound. And what we get from apes is the idea that music is social. It's not individual, it's social. And what's interesting is that birds are not social. So when birds sing, they sing as pairs. So the male sings to the female. They don't sing in groups of more than two. So when you hear a chorus of birds, what you're hearing is many, many, many couples of birds. You're not hearing a single chorus.
We can't understand their communication form, sadly. Their language, yes. And now I want to talk about the primitive musical steps of humans. When and how our oldest ancestors, sapiens, started creating music before creating first instruments. Of course, our first main instrument was our vocal, with which we probably made some rhythmic and some kind of musical phrases, which we used for communication. Did it start with rhythm or mimicking natural sounds? In short, I'm interested in the pre-musical period that people went through before they started to create music in a structured and conscious way. So I'm interested in what kind of music was that?
Well, they wouldn't have called it music first. They would have called it something else. So rhythm is everywhere. So when people work together, hunting together or carving flint tools in a quarry, chipping regularly, there's lots of rhythm going on in life. And when the rhythm became abstracted from the work and enjoyed as a pattern in itself, that's a form of music. But it's also to do with the evolution of the anatomy. So 4 million years ago, we have Australopithecines, which stands up on its legs. And many things happen when you stand up. You have your hands are free, so you can carve things. Your vocal tract descends. Your palate evolves, and you can articulate a great variety of sounds. So many sounds. There's more sounds than you need than you have function or use for. So a monkey might need 4 sounds to communicate things like predators, or whether a snake or a leopard or an eagle. When you have too many sounds, what do you do with them? Then you start to play with sounds. You play with it. You express yourself with sounds. And one way is to look at what a baby does. So when a baby is born and it communicates with a mother, there's a duet, and it's called motherese or infant-directed communication. And what that communication does, it blends together sound with emotion and with movement and with with gesture. The four things are blended together, and you can't separate out communication from emotion, from sound, from gesture. It's all one thing. And what it does, it also binds the mother together with the baby. It's communicative,
Can
very social.
we say that the first song was a mother's croon with her baby, or some kind of lullaby?
Yeah, or lullaby, and it's what's called participatory. It's absolutely social. It's not about an individual. It's the relationship between the baby and the mother, and that creates a template for human music as a child develops. So as a child grows up, language goes one way and music goes the other way. They separate into two different communication systems. But what you keep is the social dimension. And if you look at an orchestra or a jazz band or a string quartet, the musicians are always communicating with each other in very subtle ways. It's a relationship. And my book argues that this social dimension has gradually been lost in the West as we've evolved. And most people today consume music passively, not actively. They consume music as individuals. They don't make it, they just listen to it, and listen to it through their earbuds, or it's streamed. And we've lost that link with the social dimension of music.
You mentioned so many times in your works the so-called the triune brain theory, which is an evolutionary theory of brain development that emphasizes three key brain regions consisting of the brainstem, the limbic system, and the neocortex, that functions relatively independently in coping with stress via fight or flight, emotion, and cognition, respectively, which evoke different types of emotions in us while we're listening to music. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So again, going back 4 million years, as hominins evolve into Homo erectus and in due course Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, the brain gets a lot larger and it can process a lot more due to a better protein diet, due to the teeth becoming, and so on. And a very important aspect of that is that the motor cortex, which is a part of the brain which controls movement, starts to connect with the auditory cortex, which is responsible for how we process sound. So we, from then on, associate sound with motion or sound with movement, which is why we hear music as walking or as journeying or as motion or as dancing. It's wired into our system. With training, you can train a musician to process music in the same left part of the brain, which deals with language. So an interesting difference is musicians who are not trained process music as emotion on the right-hand side. But if you teach a child music, the lateralization shifts to the left-hand side, and they hear music like a language. And it shows how plastic or how adaptable the brain is.
You already mentioned one of the most important topics in music in our everyday life, which also guides our whole lives. I mean, rhythm. I'm interested in the power of rhythm in general and in music. When I hear the word rhythm, I always remember one of the greatest neuroscientists, which you know so well, Oliver Sacks, and his work and approach with music and rhythm. Once he claimed that rhythm is the most powerful and primal musical element. Do you remember a great film named Awakening about him?
Yes.
I don't know if you remember one particular scene from this movie. It's my favorite scene. where the power of rhythm is perfectly demonstrated. You may remember one of his patients, an elderly lady begins to walk freely, but always stops at a certain point. And Sachs discovered that the reason for that was a floor, a checkboard floor. He discovered that she could only move on black and white squares. And when the floor ended, she always stopped. Because the brain also has a visual rhythm. So I want to talk about the importance of rhythm in music and in everyday life.
Well, I mean, rhythm is everything. If you think you have rhythm in conversation, turn taking, how we speak to each other, that's rhythm. There's rhythm in how the human brain has the ability to remember. So memory is rhythm, because what you're doing, you're rehearsing or you're rehearing thoughts in your brain. That's a kind of rhythm. Rhythm is the body, so how we dance is rhythm. Rhythm is about time, how we imagine the past and the future. And rhythm can bring together so many different dimensions. It brings people together, so people can work together through rhythm. You see that in chain gangs, or you see it in factories. Rhythm is a very good way of making work more efficient. And when we dance together or when we gesture together, it's a good way of communicating emotion or a state of, or a theory of mind. So I know what you're thinking by the way you move. So it's an efficient way of communicating. It's almost like telepathy. If you think of all the things rhythm can do, rhythm is just the wrong word. Rhythm is, and I think some cognitive scientists even think the brain is rhythmic. The brain thinks rhythmically. So music is the art form of rhythm. That's why I think music is superior to painting and to literature. It's much more fundamental than the other art forms.
So rhythm is most essential in music. Of
Yeah,
course, in every art form is some kind of rhythm.
I know. If you think how much time philosophers have wasted arguing whether it's possible to understand what somebody else is thinking. So I'm thinking of Wittgenstein and so on. So how do I know what you're feeling? Well, with music is easy because we can share emotions, share beliefs through music. And because philosophers are dumb, they're just very arrogant about art usually. They don't understand how important music is.
Mentioning Oliver Sacks leads me to ask questions about music and health interaction, both mental and physical. I think they cannot be discussed independently. Many people have heard about different types of music therapies, both ancient and modern versions. I know it has a very long history, and I was so amazed when I heard from you that early Arab doctors greatly valued the world of music in promoting mental health.
Mm-hmm.
There were hospitals where music therapy was a regular prescription in the treatment of diseases, especially in the treatment of mental health.
Yeah, yeah.
Where do the first signs of music therapy come from? And I want to compare this with Western Christian culture also.
Well, I think it probably began in ancient Greece, or if not India. With Plato and the tradition of the humors, the medical humors. But the basic principle is that music has harmony, and the harmony of music can make the body harmony. The interaction of the body between the soul and the body can become dissonant or unharmonic because of mental illness. And the idea is that music can make the body harmonious. It's a very powerful idea. What the Christians brought to it was the idea of contemplation, or perhaps a way of processing pain. That a great deal of the Christian tradition in music was about contemplating the pain of Christ and the crucifixion. And it's a therapeutic, the idea of music, you can't change it, but what you can't change, you can understand. And you understand it by understanding the logic or even the underlying necessity of something. And and accepting pain. But in clinical terms, there's music for depression, music for schizophrenia, music for dementia. And these are very different conditions, and they require different kinds of intervention. So you don't apply the same music for everything. For instance, people who have depression, you don't apply things which are too stimulating. So generally, if it's too fast or too happy, or even Baroque music is the wrong thing to give somebody with depression, because it makes it worse. With dementia, music is a fantastic way of awakening memories. So people get the most formative musical memories when they're teenagers. And when you have dementia, you can lose your language, even your identity. You don't know who you are anymore. But as Oliver Sacks shows, if you play somebody with dementia, a song that they love from their youth, it reawakens their sense of self, and the language can come back.
My next topic is about music, religion, and spiritual experiences. I want to touch on this topic because I think music has a main place in these kinds of religious and spiritual rituals and ceremonies, from ancient civilizations to modern Western culture. And I think music was and is the most powerful tool in this kind of ritual anywhere in the world. It doesn't matter if it's some Eastern old-fashioned shamanistic ritual or modern Christian ceremonies. Am I right?
Oh, absolutely. I think it evolved at the same time. Traditions of shamanism, for instance, but also what's called the oceanic experience of feeling that you're swimming in a great sea. So music is like water. And we came from water. We were fish once, and we go back to water. And the sea is the symbol of a infinite oceanic experience. And we have the freedom to swim, to fly, to float, and we're bigger than ourselves. So what it gives you is a sense of flying, what shamans call, spiritual traveling. So a shaman could travel to a different level of the cosmos when they're stimulated, and it gives you a sense of the divine, of something which is all powerful. We call it God, but who knows what it is? But so all the elements are in place, which become established later on as institutionalized religion, but they're already in place in music. And for people like me who are not religious, music gives us our spiritual experience.
Yes, and it's a very interesting thing why music provokes such powerful feelings and transformative experiences in humans. There are so many theories and research by many great scientists on how and why the brain reacts to this kind of music. But my feeling is that it's not fully explained, and I think it still remains a mystery.
And it's beyond language and beyond reason. So music is still a way of communicating experiences which cannot be talked about and can't be explained. So it's beyond language and it's beyond reason. So people call that religious.
And we mentioned language, and let's talk about music and language. There are so many differences between language and music as a communication form, but they also have some similarities. They both connect people with a rhythm and physical movements, which you have already listed. And there are various stories, hypotheses, and theories by linguists about musical development in humans. Some of those linguists are really great thinkers, but most of these linguistic theories often do not fit the real history of music. So, what do you think about this as a musicologist?
Yeah, so we think of there is an affinity between language and music, although a lot of differences as well. But some interesting similarities. They have syntax or grammar, they have vocabulary, they have a generative grammar, what Chomsky calls generatively. So you can take something very, a deep structure and you elaborate it with surface structure. But there are also very powerful differences. So language doesn't deal much with rhythm or prosody or the melody. Yes, the way I talk can be melodic, but melody isn't so important in the way I talk, nor is rhythm, nor is timbre or tone color. But with music, it reverses the priority. So music puts rhythm and prosody and melody and dynamics and timbre at the front and the center. And semantics is not so important. So it's almost impossible in music to describe a cat or a dog, or a proposition. The cat is sitting on the mat. You can't say that in music.
Once I read a theory that music can describe very concrete things, that people can understand what the melody is saying to them as a speaker. I don't mean personal interpretations. I mean concrete things which everyone will agree with. Do you think it's impossible to say concrete thing with the music?
Yeah, you can't. But music isn't language, and it's not painting. Music is something different.
What is the maximum level of understanding of music? Just emotions?
It is emotion, but emotion is a very complex word. It doesn't just mean feeling, because you can feel hungry, or that's not an emotion. Emotion is very close to a state of mind or a belief system.
But I'm not talking largely about emotions. Let's take universal emotions, the seven basic emotions, for example.
Yeah.
Happiness, sadness, anger, fear, etc. Is this the highest level of understanding of what music is about as a concrete thing?
I think it is. An emotion such as happiness is very complicated. It doesn't just mean being satisfied. Happiness has a biological meaning to do with the well-being of an organism. When everything is working, the organism is happy. So we associate happiness with stability, with harmony, with peace, with complicated structure. And if you compare that to sadness we associate that with loss of somebody you love, or loss of a country when you're exiled. But the whole state of mind. So when we are listening to music and we're sad, it isn't just a feeling, it's the way we understand the world. When a creature or a person is sad, it has a more analytic way of processing. It's more detail oriented. We take off our rose tinted spectacles, our happy glasses, and we see the world with realism. We see things as they really are. We're much more focused on detail when we're sad. And that's why sad music is slower, because we need more time to process the details, and why it's less unified, because you can't assimilate the details into a schema, which you can do when you're happy. But then you have also the exhaustion. When you're sad, you have no energy. So sad people have no energy and they fall down and their voices are quiet because you have no energy, and they don't articulate what they say because the mouth has no energy, so they just mumble their words. And music can do all of that. Music can mumble, it can whisper very quietly, and sad tunes go down. Everything goes down in sad music. So imagine that it can do all these things. It can communicate how you feel, how you act, how you think, how you perceive the world, just through a little bit of sad music. It's like a supercomputer. It can say so many things with a minimum amount of material.
And for our listeners, I definitely want to talk about the first recorded name of composer in the history of the world. I mean, Enheduanna.
Who's that?
Sorry if I didn't pronounce her name correctly. I mean, the world's first recorded composer. I said Enheduanna.
Oh yes, Enheduanna. Yes, indeed, it's a
And
fascinating.
we know for sure that she's the earliest author in the world history and recorded composer, right?
As in the first person we know their name of. So she was a Sumerian princess, and she about 4,000 years ago in Babylon, and she was the daughter of King Sargon the Great of Sumeria. So as a princess, she would write poetry or songs, and she would sing them on top of the ziggurat of Ur, like a pyramid, and she would sing them to the moon god. And she is the first name in civilization we have of a composer or an artist. And I'm very happy that she was a woman, because music is so, misogynistic, or nearly every composer in the West is a man. And what's extraordinary is that Enheduanna's poetry was so influential. It was communicated thousands of years, and was probably informed the Greek hymns and the Hebrew Psalms, and eventually Gregorian chant in the church. And you have the influence going back 4,000 years of one woman.
It's a very beautiful story. In your book, you wrote that we are all born with musical talent, but our main restriction is the Western assumption about music. We all have this talent to create music, but Western culture has repressed this inner aspiration. In the early period, there was no distinction between performer and audience, because there were no passive listeners and people sang together. Everyone took part in group common songs. Everybody was enjoying participating in the music. And the early view was that everyone was musical. But it's changed dramatically over the years. So can you tell me how this attitude has changed over those centuries?
Yeah, it's a strange thing that in most of the world and in most of human history, everybody was musical and wasn't shy about participating. We're very subconscious about joining in. We were all born musical, but we don't like to do it. Maybe because music has been professionalized too much. We have very high standards, and but it goes back 1,000 years to the invention of music notation. So I talk in the book about this monk called uh, Guido, who was Italian, about 1050, and he invents staff notation. And all the trouble begins with notation, because with notation, you have this split between the composer and the listener. So
can we consider the development of civilization as the reason for all
yeah,
this?
it's civilization. It's a symptom of civilization in the West, and it's not one thing, it's many things coming together. So
And can we extend this idea to all other art forms?
yeah. But of course, I'm not talking about folk music or jazz or rock music. I'm talking about classical music.
I'm very interested in your attitude about a very interesting concept. Mozart once quoted, "The music is not in the notes, but in the silence between." It's a very nice quote, but it conveys its subtext very artistically, I think. And when people hear the word the silence in music, most of them remember or pop out in their minds a very famous composition by American experimental composer John Cage named 4 Feet 33. Silence played a major role in several of Cage's works composed before 4 Feet 33. So what do you think about this concept? It was an old idea, and which culture we can find those kinds of big empty spaces or pauses as silence,
Of course,
some kind.
there's no silence. And Cage didn't really mean that. What he meant was the ambient environmental sounds which you can listen to. There's no silence. And the silence in Mozart between the notes, that's the time for you to remember the music. It's time to contemplate the music. And silence in a lot of Eastern music, it's the continuation of the dying sounds. So as the sounds gradually die away, there's no line between the quieter sound and the memory or the spiritual echoes of the sound. And those echoes are a way of drawing the soul up to heaven or into yourself. It's a way of meditating.
Is it some kind of awakening?
Yeah, awakening. It's awakening, maybe something in the soul. So it's a transition where into a more spiritual or mental kind of music. It's still music, but it's not sonic. It's something which is imaginary or spiritual. And you have to get from the sound to the silence. It's a journey. So with me, because I'm a trained musicologist, I can read a score. I don't need to hear the sounds. It's a bit like when you're reading a book. You don't need to speak the words to read the book. You just read them with your mind. It'd be very strange to read a book when you're, speaking out the words. But I can look at the score and I hear it in my mind, and I think it's beautiful. It's I suppose the ancient Greek theorists thought the music was silent. It was, or rather, the music of the spheres, the universal harmony of the planets and the stars, was inaudible. It's the music of harmony or mathematics. If you think about why mathematics is beautiful, the order of maths or physics, it's a bit like music. It's not about sound. It's to do with the underlying harmony. Harmony means both things. It means proportions, and the logic, it also means what you hear. It's two things.
And I want to ask the most popular topic right now for every art form. I mean, AI. I'm interested in your opinion about this. How do you think this type of technology will affect the future of music and creating music? Because what it's doing right now is pretty amazing, strange, and dangerous for some people.
I'm not worried. I think AI is yet another tool or extension, and we've been using tools ever since we had a flute. A flute is a tool. It extends what we can do. With it, the flute, we can sing higher notes. We can play a different kind of sound. A violin extends our hands, our arm, like a car extends our body. A computer or a music synthesizer can extend what we can do. So as long as technology doesn't replace us, you cannot replace creativity. You can extend it, or you can enrich it. That's the difference. Where I disagree. I don't think it's possible yet, or maybe never, for AI to replace human creativity. I don't believe it.
But it mimics different music genres very convincingly. And too many people, even professionals among them, are confused about whether it's artificial intelligence or human-made music.
It does mimic. I'm thinking about, on Spotify, there are algorithms which produce songs for different emotions, and they sound just fine. And if that's all you want, then it's fine. It depends what the market wants. It depends what you want, what the listeners want. And what I'm afraid of is that there may be a dissolution or a destruction of human taste. But if we lose our capacity to have high musical values, then AI will win.
We all know that music is very important for human development. But what role does musical education play in modern civilization and the development of individuals?
Well, it's
I know it's a big question.
it worries me because I'm a university professor, and every year my students care less and less about the history. They don't care about music history. All they care about is film music, John Williams or something, or um, and I wonder. And also, there's a lot of talk about decolonization, especially in America, where um, there's anxiety that we don't represent music by black people or women, and they associate Beethoven with slavery or white supremacy because he was born at the same time as, you know. And it's a very complex question about how you see the relationship between um, life and art. So yeah, an artist can be a bad person. You know, Wagner was a horrible person. Picasso was a terrible person. Does it matter? Um, and at the same time, because an artist is born in the same period as slavery, does he make it responsible for slavery or the value system at the time? And I see people have a very unsophisticated understanding of the complexity of life and the complexity of creativity. We want it to be very woke now. We want everything to be, you know, well, I don't know. You know what woke means. But life isn't like that, especially not in art. And as professors, we have a lot of responsibility in asking difficult questions. And there's pressure on me um, to not to challenge students, not to make them feel uncomfortable, as they say. I think that when I began my career, my job was to make students feel uncomfortable, to argue with them, to challenge them. And I'm very worried that it'll become no longer possible to do that. I can lose my job if I challenge a student too much.
That's sad. You made such amazing discoveries and research on music. What has been the most surprising discovery you have made in your entire career?
Yeah, so when I came to Liverpool, I learned a lot more about pop music. And there's a particular album called The Aeroplane Over the Sea by a cult indie band called Neutral Milk Hotel. Neutral Milk Hotel. So I really recommend this album, The Airplane Over the Sea from 1997. What surprised me was that the musicians were idiots. They're not educated, they're redneck Americans. And yet, what they collectively achieved is a miracle. It's a miraculous masterpiece. And I wrote about this. And I don't understand how it's possible because it completely contradicts everything I know or believe about how music works. You know, how it's possible for people to come together and to have a collective creative act. And I don't think it was planned that way. It just happens. And I can find lots of interesting signs in the album that it's a perfect structure, but I don't know how it's possible. So a lot of music in pop music, especially in indie, I love indie in particular, in how rough or noisy or dirty it is. Um, I'm surprised how much I love it because it goes against everything I do as a musicologist.
Nah, because you mentioned you like indie rock. What are your favorite indie rock bands?
Well, it has to be Radiohead. Radiohead. I think Radiohead are the greatest musical artists alive. I think Björk possibly behind them. I put Björk second, the Icelandic composer, but I think Radiohead creates masterpieces.
Um, I'm a big fan of Pulp also. Uh, I don't know if you like this band.
Who? Oh, Pulp. Yes, Pulp. I love Pulp. It's a different generation, a different age. I grew up with Pulp. Hmm.
Mm, I have a question. I know and I'm sure about it, but if I'm wrong, please correct me. Okay, maybe I'm wrong. I know your favorite genre of music is a classical music. Am I right?
That's right.
And especially Beethoven.
That's right.
Okay, Azem, please tell me which genre of music makes you the most uncomfortable.
Jazz.
Really?
Jazz. I don't like jazz. I've got a deaf spot for jazz.
Do you have some kind of unpleasant associations or have another background from your teens?
No, I just the way my mentality works, I don't like redundancy. I want every note to matter. And it's the same with, I mean, I laugh, my wife is Irish, but if you listen to an Irish person talk, they just talk like jazz. There's too many words. I want to say, stop, too many words. Say it more simply. I get very impatient with it. I get impatient with jazz.
You once compared the relationship between a mother and baby to what happens in jazz improvisation. Can you talk about that?
Well, I know. That's a funny thing.
It was a very interesting and a great comparison for me because it's very, very true in so many ways. Because the relationship between mother and baby is a very complex
But
thing.
I wonder whether with a mother and baby, every single word matters. Everything matters. Yeah. But also, I'm very honest that what I think isn't what I feel. So as a scientist, a scholar, I believe many things, but as a musician, I don't like some things. It's possible to be both. Um, so as a scholar, I have to be completely impartial, objective. But as a listener, I have tastes and I have prejudices.
Now I want to ask about the composer in which you are a true expert. I mean Beethoven, and his most popular masterpiece, the Ninth Symphony. I'm interested in why it's so relative for different cultures and different ideologies. For example, once Slavoj Žižek mentioned that Beethoven's Ninth Symphony was used by political movements which were totally opposed to each other. In Nazi Germany, it was played at great public events. In Soviet Union, it was performed as a communist song. In China, where almost every Western song was prohibited, the Ninth Symphony was accepted, and in so many different countries. And now it's the anthem of the European Union. What do you think is the true mystery and magic behind this masterpiece?
No, it's the story of the five blind men and the elephant. So you have an elephant, which is a huge thing, and you have five blind people, and one person feels the tail of the elephant, one person feels the trunk, one person feels the feet of the elephant. When you have something as big as the Ninth Symphony, it has many different parts. And what an ideology blinds you or it narrows you to one aspect. So if you're in Japan, they have this tradition where they play the Ninth Symphony on New Year's Eve, and you think, well, why is Beethoven adopted by Japanese culture as a Japanese composer? Well, because Japanese culture likes the idea of selflessness, of being selfless, and there's something about the symphony which is about sacrifice and suffering and getting beyond the self. And that's the quality that they latch onto in Japan. Whereas what they preferred in Germany was the opposite, was the Führer principle of having a strong leader. So they think of Beethoven being powerful and leading the whole community. So they latch onto a different aspect. But of course, great art contains multitudes. So Shakespeare or Michelangelo or Beethoven, they contain multitudes of possibilities. This is what great art is. And it's impossible to rationalize it, because to rationalize art is to put it into a box or into a concept. But that's why it's art. Art can't do that. Art is rich as nature. You know, Kant said that art is as creative and as rich as a natural world. You can't contain it.
I have a very funny question. In one of my favorite Georgian comedy shows named Katsebi, translated as The Man, famous comedian George Analyze always had a question with musician guests. And the question was always the following: how many notes are in octave? There were so many different answers from professional musicians from different genres. There was version of the 7, 8, 12, 13, 15,
Yes.
and etc. Please tell him how many notes are in
Mm.
octave. So, George, here's the answer to your question from the most competent person uh, on earth on the topic of music.
Oh gosh, what an interesting question. So, because I like Beethoven the most, I would say that there are 10 notes, which is why there's 8, the octave, plus the two most commonly used chromatic notes, which is the augmented fourth, or the F sharp, and the minor third, which is the E flat in C major. So basically it's an octave with one or two extra notes, because it's a conservative classical scale. If I was pushing towards Wagner, there might be as many as um, uh, 12 notes in the, but that isn't my cup of tea, as we say in England.
Okay. I want to ask a question about the theme which you're starting your last book, The Musical Human, and this first chapter called Voyager. It's about the Voyager Golden Records, which launched 40 years ago by NASA and listened packed with 27 samples of Earth's music, as well as greetings in 41 languages. And on disc 1, there are 29 musical compositions.
Yes.
And after Beethoven is a Georgian polyphonic choral folk song named Chakrulo.
Mm-hmm.
And all the Georgians are very proud of this. I know that you know Georgian music as well. So, what do you think was the main reason why NASA chose to listen to this Georgian composition for other civilizations?
I think I was telling you earlier that it is the oldest examples of polyphony in the world. Polyphony is when many people sing together, and it survived thanks to the mountainous landscape of Georgia. And there's a theory that music evolved from polyphony, that the earliest music was polyphonic because it was most sociable. You have lots of people who sing at the same time. So Georgia is closer to the origins of world music than probably any other country in the world. That's very interesting. You should be very proud of that.
Thank you. I know you play the piano very well. Am I right?
Yes.
Do you play other instruments also?
I do. I play the viola.
From your early childhood? Or...
Yeah. From when I was a teenager. I began late. I began the piano late, when I was 13, and the viola when I was 14.
Have you tried to create or compose music or write songs, maybe with your friends?
I tried to compose, but
and just for fun?
Well, yeah, we play together. I have friends we play. I accompany chamber music on the piano. I'm a good pianist, so I'm quite useful. And it's great fun. So we don't play for any audiences. We play for each other just for fun.
Great. I'm very interested in your musical tastes. Besides the classical music, you mentioned that you like indie rock and experimental music, and I already know you like David Bowie, the Beatles, and Pulp, we just mentioned. Uh, so,
Yes.
can you tell me more bands or songwriters? Which one
Mhm.
you like the most? Of course, not only the British ones, and from different genres also. Which musicians did you listen to and still listen with great pleasure?
Oh Lord. Yeah, I like Captain Beefheart.
Wait, now I'm going to try mind reading. I think you like Leonard Cohen.
No, no. I might surprise you. I like Captain Beefheart.
If Captain Before,
And I like
if Captain, then Tom Waits definitely.
yeah, it's a bit like Tom Waits. Yeah. I like ABBA, funnily enough, very much. I like Arcade Fire. I like The National, another American indie band. I like Sufjan Stevens, the singer-songwriter. I actually like Taylor Swift, funnily enough. I think I admire her. I admire her craftsmanship. There's lots of bands I like. I like rap and hip hop. Um, like the Wu-Tang Clan. I love their music. The Wu-Tang Clan and Eminem. I've got quite a broad range of taste.
Yes, I see. And finally, I want to talk about you as a teacher, as a professor, and as a musicologist. What are the main differences and common things in various generations of students who are interested in this field of academic teaching of music and musicology? What changed that you can see very vividly over those years? I'm not necessarily talking about issues, or maybe issues also. Why not, if those exist? I am interested in your observations over these years as a professor of the university, as a researcher, and as a scientist.
Well, I the funny thing is, I can be pessimistic and talk about how the students don't know enough music. When I started, I knew a lot of music. They don't. It's the marketplace, and they arrive and they buy a degree because we have, fees, university fees. They have to pay for their degree, and they treat it like a customer, and I'm the provider. But also, they don't know enough of we say bread and butter, so the basics, the basic history, the basic techniques. So I'm very traditional and very conservative. Although I like the latest ideas, I think it's only possible to deal with the latest ideas if you have a good foundation, a good framework. So you need to do your homework. You need to know the history and the techniques. If you don't do that, then you're finished. And so I'm sorry to end this conversation on a pessimistic note, but I'm very I'm very depressed by the way that music education is going in the UK.
Thank you for your honesty. And I want to ask several questions if you have the time, of course.
Yes.
And the end of our conversation will not be on such a sad note. I hope so. It's not the last question. I have two more. So, first, I'm interested in your life-changing moments, maybe little and very, very small things, which provoke the biggest changes and transformations in your work, in your personal life, and in your philosophy and worldview of life and music?
Wow, what a question. I could say becoming a father, maybe, was life-changing. I'm not sure how it changed my career. I could say, okay, this will be strange. When I began my PhD, my doctoral work, which I did on late Beethoven, it was, well, anybody doing a PhD will tell you it's very difficult because you're lonely. You're so lonely. You have nobody. You have no colleagues. You have no friends. No one doing it. It's just you. You might see your teacher once every couple of weeks. It must be being like being a monk in a monastery, and it changes you. You know, you become a different person because of that. Your value system changes. I think it's religious. It's like being an apprentice in some religious order. And if you get through, well, you do. I got through it after two or 3 years. You become hardened. I don't use the word spiritual, but you know what I mean by that. You become a more abstract kind of person.
What would be your recommendations for our listeners, students, music lovers, also for musicians? Besides reading all of your books, what would be your advice to understand music better?
Oh, well, don't be afraid. Don't be. Two things. Firstly, make time to listen in your busy life, to listen to something different. And listen to beyond 3 minutes. So in the Spotify streaming culture, everything is now 3 minutes long. Listen to a half an hour piece of music to raise your boredom threshold, your attention span beyond 3 minutes. If you can focus on half an hour of music, that's good for your muscles, your mental muscles. And the second thing is, don't be afraid of learning to read music, because your experience will become a lot richer and deeper. It's not difficult. A child learns to read music. Don't be intimidated by it. And you'll get a much, well, it'll open so many windows to life if you do that.
That's great advice. And finally, I'm very interested in which subject you are working on right now and what will be next paper be about. If it's possible to say, of course.
Yeah. Well, I'm working on nature, music and nature, which is the opposite of the human. It's understanding the ecology, the environment, how music has always connected us to nature, and how music might save the world one day because of nature. All sorts of ideas. So yeah.
Thank you very much. It was very nice talking to you. I think it was a brilliant.
Thank you.
And wish you all the best in your current and future work, in your personal life, and in everything. Thank you a lot again.
Thank you. And thank you for an unusually brilliant conversation. I've done so many of these things, and you've been one of the best, the most interesting and the most coherent. So congratulations. Very good.
Thank you for these words.
Thank you. Okay.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.